I don't know how you do it, it's not my job. I'm not an activist, I'm a journalist, but I see the problem out there. You know, where do our leaders get their instructions from? There's a very interesting case in Mr. Blair, our own dear Mr. Blair, who now has become a Catholic. He runs a faith foundation, he's the peace envoy, he was the war envoy, and now he's the peace envoy in the Middle East. But he hasn't been to Gaza, presumably because Hamas don't wear ties. And there was a very good article, I hate to say this, in the Sunday Times not long ago, because it's owned by Murdoch, I restrained myself, but nonetheless it was in the Sunday Times, in which a very fine writer said, you know, Blair has found God, but he doesn't seem to take any advice. Like, God didn't say to him in, say, February 2003, Tony, this Iraq thing may not be such a good idea. I suppose Tony speaks to God. Maybe your president does. I don't know. I mean, I've been asking people in New Zealand, Armenia, Ireland, Britain, France, can anyone tell me why Blair says and does what he does? I have no idea. I think it might be because after his genuine political victory in Northern Ireland, ending Britain's 800-year colonial war of suffering and brutality between the British, the English and the Irish, maybe it went to his head. Maybe he thought he could solve, you know, the Kashmir crisis, the partition of India from 48, the Middle East. Or maybe it's just that British Prime Ministers, when they go up to bed, they go up past all these oil paintings on the staircase of Gladstone, Disraeli, Lloyd George, Winston Churchill, of course, and suddenly they find that Winston Churchill's waistcoat fits rather well. You know, over and over again, and journalists forget this, we constantly, when we want to go to war, we evoke World War II. Always. At the time of the Suez Crisis in 1956, Anthony Eden, British Prime Minister, called Nasser the Mussolini of the Nile. And of course, when we wanted to go to war in Iraq, well, not us, but they wanted to go to war in Iraq, Saddam became the Hitler of the Tigris River, the Hitler of Baghdad. And we were all entitled to become Winston Churchill. And anyone who objected to the war, they were an appeaser, like Neville Chamberlain. You know the story, the way it goes. And therefore, of course, we can then justify war. Not as the reality of war actually is, which is the total failure of the human spirit. It's about death, not about primarily victory or defeat, but as a policy option. You see, that's how we get the permission. The Archbishop of Canterbury, poor soul, actually said that the 1991 Gulf War was a just war. And if you saw what I see on battlefields in the Middle East, at massacres, bodies torn apart. The famous highway of death, there were actually two highways of death, north of Kuwait in 1991, where the British as well as the American Air Force had bombed and bombed and bombed, not just the military, but refugee cars as well. And there in the desert were men, some of them soldiers, some not, women and children, being torn apart, dead, by dogs. It was lunchtime. And bits of them, arms, fingers, being taken off to be eaten in the desert. You don't see that. If you saw what I see on battlefields, you would never ever support a war or talk about just wars. But I've been over and over again confronted, particularly in British Commonwealth countries, by the argument, but don't you think World War II was just? And since my father, who was much older than my mum, fought in the First World War and was signed up to be the resistance leader in southern England after the German invasion, which of course mercifully never came because he would have been executed as a terrorist, no doubt. I think, yes, my father was right to be prepared to fight for England. Yes, the Royal Air Force was right to fight the Battle of Britain. But World War II is finished. You know, when Menachem Begin was sending the Israeli army up to Beirut in 1982, he wrote this crazed letter to President Ronald Reagan saying he felt as if he was advancing on Berlin with Hitler in his bunker. Hitler being the pathetic and corrupt Arafat. And, you know, there was a very good piece written by Uri Avneri, a very brave Israeli journalist whom most of you will know of. He wrote an open letter to Menachem Begin, who of course then was the Israeli Prime Minister, and it began, "Dear Mr. Prime Minister, Hitler is dead." And I feel more and more we need to have a cut-off line after World War II. You know, after the Second World War, we introduced legislation and human rights codes and regulations to prevent World War III. We had new protocols of the International Red Cross, part of which was founded on the Hague Convention, which was before the First World War. We had the UN, the General Assembly, the Security Council. The European Union was founded as a coal and trade organization between Germany and France to prevent another battle of the Verdun, World War I, and to prevent another occupation of Paris by the German army. Germany and France would never go to war again, nor would Europe. We'd better forget Bosnia at the moment. But we laid down a forest of laws to protect human rights, to protect us. And they were good laws. And we were right to do what we did. I believe in the UN, despite the fact that it's a friendly old donkey that comes clip-clopping in at the end when we need it. But it's there to be used. And I don't think after World War II, I think it's very hard to find a just war, or an excuse for a just war. Korea? At times, at the beginning perhaps. But was Vietnam just? Was Yemen a just war? The British fought in Yemen, the British fight against AOKA in Cyprus, or Mau Mau in Kenya, or in Palestine. Look, was the partition of India a just thing? Was Northern Ireland just? Was the Iran-Iraq war just? 8 years, 1.5 million dead? I watched many of them die. I don't think just war exists anymore. I think that we need that cut-off point after World War II. And I think many Arabs whom I talk to say the same thing. They believe the same thing. You know, one of the strange things is that we have this idea that in some way the Arab-Muslim world don't know what we know. That they don't have the advantages, of course, of our civilization. I don't think we care about them very much. That's why we don't know how many have died in Iraq. We know exactly how many American servicemen have died. I think the figure today is 4,167. And we know where they come from, their ages, their names, precisely how many children they have, the age of their widow. But how many people in this room, there will be one or two, can put their hands up now and name, I don't ask you to name, just tell me, how many can name an Iraqi killed since 2003? There will be a few hands. Any? Not a lot, you see, because we don't care about the Iraqi dead. The only time that President Bush was asked how many Iraqis were killed, he gave a hopeless underestimate. He said 30,000, but what he actually said was 30,000 more or less. Well, more or less. Can you imagine if I've been asked how many American troops had died in Iraq, and he said, oh, 4,000 more or less. It would have been scandalous. But it's okay if it's about Iraqis. We are going to give them democracy. We're going to give Iraq human rights. We've had a surge, which means escalation, by the way, if you're using Vietnam speak. So it's okay. The fact that the casualties have fallen because the Shiites have ethnically cleansed all the Sunnis out of the mixed areas doesn't matter. I mean, how many Iraqis have been killed? 250,000, 500,000, 1 million, more? I have no idea. But perhaps, I don't know. And we will never know, and we're not meant to know. And we don't care. You know, there was a CIA officer that came up to me with a huge pistol in his belt in the Spanish base near Kufa. This is after the Madrid bombings, but before the Spanish withdrew. And he said, you know, he said, there are dozens of armed men on the streets at night, in the country roads. I said, of course, it's an insurgency. He said, what could we have done to stop this? And I said, well, when you reached Baghdad, you might have pitched a huge tent city for every sick and wounded Iraqi outside Baghdad, and give them your help, and help the suffering Iraqis, and show your love for them. But you didn't do that. I said, you could have adopted a Roman measure. I don't mean the crucifixions. I said, every time the Romans occupied a country, they made all the people in that country citizens of Rome. And I said, not entirely in humour, why didn't you make every Iraqi a citizen of the United States? If you love them so much. They would have been very proud. They wouldn't have all rushed to JFK and asked for, you know, a green card. They'd have been proud to be citizens of America. There would have been no insurgency. They would be your people. And it would be your oil. And they would be very grateful to you. But that did not commend itself to us, did it? Because that wasn't what it was about. I've said this before, I've said it in California before. You know, I think the Arabs would like some of our democracy. After all, they've tolerated all these dictators whom we support, and all the torture chambers which we accept, and all the police torturers, many of whom have been trained by us. They would like some of our democracy, and I think they'd like some packages of human rights from our supermarket shelves. But the freedom that I am always asked about in Lebanon, where I live, is that the Arabs would like freedom from us. And this we do not intend to give them.